So yeah, I've been doing this for a long time. I'm not an expert by any stretch of the imagination, but I find the whole process kind of fascinating. It's also a little bit of a high risk activity. I've protected fixed the process a little bit, but it's not uncommon to spend several hours on an egg and then accidentally drop it on the table, and then I have a broken egg. So the whole thing is unique in a lot of ways. It's not exactly the best for this kind of demonstration, so we have another camera in case everybody's getting nervous about that. It's called Pysanky. Pysanky is actually plural for pisat, to write or to inscribe. It's actually one of several egg decorating artistic mediums, so there's different ways to do it, but it's by far the most popular. It is done in Ukraine primarily, but there's several other countries that do it as well, including Poland, Bulgaria, former Soviet states, Eastern Europe, that kind of thing. So tool-wise, you can definitely upgrade, but you generally start with something that looks like this, which is pretty old school. I don't use this one as much because I can't tell what size it is. So I use this updated version that's got a lot of wax on it, and they come in different sizes. This is a kiska, and the general principle is you put wax in this, and then you heat it up, and you can write with it. Now there are electric versions of this. I like the fire for some reason. I guess I'm a pyromaniac. Wax-wise, normally I use uncolored beeswax like this, but for demonstration purposes, it's probably not the best option. So I've also got some dark that I've been using. It's got a little Kiska imprint on it for people that are kind of interested in that. That's pretty much it, with the caveat that the dye that we use is special dye. It's very, very potent, as I learned in my first experience and ruined a bunch of my clothes in high school. These are very, I guess, strong, and as a result, they're also not food safe. So you generally prep these in advance, let them cool down so you don't cook any of your eggs, and put them in various containers for dipping. The nice thing about them is, unlike traditional Easter egg dyeing, the process goes a lot faster. So where you might otherwise have to wait like 20 minutes to get a pale yellow, you can get a much brighter, darker color in a lot less time. Other kind of accoutrements that you've learned about, I've accepted the need for over the years. So this is modern technology right here. So this has basically a nail on the top of it. It's kind of a sharp point with a very minimal edge. So you can see it's not like perfectly smooth, but it's connected to a little air bulb here that you can press. And the idea here is you put 2 holes in the eggs when you're done, or before you start, pierce the yolk, and then blow this out. Now, traditionally, you didn't do this. You do this with your mouth. But between the food, not very food safe, friendly dyes, and the fact that like sometimes it takes me a very long time to finish an egg, I know, and the egg is not in the best of shape, I'm not really into having that in my mouth. So even with that, that's still fairly high risk. So a few years ago, I was upgraded to even more modern technologies. The larger the hole, the little bit easier it is to get it out. So this is a Dremel. I have multiple tips, but I really only ever use this one, which is kind of a pointed one. So it's well used. I probably should upgrade the tip. I guess there's a few other things, not significant by any stretch of the imagination, but depending on the design, there are other things you can get, like this little gizmo, which you can open to be the appropriate size for your egg, and then use it to spin, and get really solid lines on. So if you hold your hand still, rest it on this and spin it, then it takes out some of the skill required to put on concentric circles onto your egg. If you need a circle design, you can also get yourself some of these. I don't think these are super useful, but I have a bunch of them. I think that there's, I've got lots and lots of different sizes of these. I think for the larger eggs, especially if you're talking about something like an ostrich egg, for example, that the egg is a not inconsequential cost by itself. So you want your circles to be circles. So I thought I would just get started here. I selected one of my favorite designs. There are different, it's kind of interesting because Pysanky has a lot of meaning behind the designs themselves. Here are some older ones that I've done. but there's symbolism between each item, like whether or not you're having bees or you're having little grandmothers. More modern eggs, things like snowflakes, are kind of more popular now, but that's traditionally there's a lot of symbolism that's associated with this. The one of the things I've learned, in addition to all the different meaning behind the designs, things like ladders, for example, which represent are often put on eggs that are given to older people because it's supposed to represent the ladder that gets you up to heaven. So, you know, transition in time in your life, and then you can go up the ladder. And things like bees, honeybees, which are a representative of solid work practices, and things like wheat, which I guess the traditional meaning behind wheat is actually a lifetime fulfillment. You worked for something your entire life, and then you're gifted with things like wheat. I don't grow wheat, so I don't really know why that is so hard, but there you go. So I have one here. I've got stages of eggs because honestly they take different amounts of time. So this one's got some marks on it already, and I'll probably upgrade a few times. Like I said, the process is actually really, really old. It's one of the reasons probably why the technology hasn't changed at all. So they actually have eggs that are not, they have some very, very old chicken eggs, but a lot of them, the ones that we have that are ceramic, they actually have been around for, oh, I don't know, like a couple thousand years. So this well predates modern Christianity, although traditionally it is a craft that is done around Easter time. There are also wooden eggs, but those are traditionally painted, not wax relief, and I tend not to do those. I guess I like the high risk activity of the chicken eggs. So all of my eggs are not, these ones are not blown out yet. So this is a real egg. So when you're doing this, there's a couple things you want to keep in mind. Obviously, you'll notice I've got some paper towels underneath. I've definitely broken some eggs while I'm doing this, and I've already broken one of my rules, which is when you first heat up these kiskas, it's pretty common for the wax to be fairly runny. So you want to try and clean off the edges to get as thin a line as possible. Depending on the design, you know, there's anywhere between a couple of colors, and not counting the underlying wax or the underlying egg color. So you can have anywhere from just a couple, you know, maybe a red and a black with the white, or a red and a black and a brown egg, to upwards of, you know, 15 colors. In general, the process involves you dyeing in sequential order with cognizance to certain egg colors. Not, they don't cover each other well, so there's some tricks there with certain colors. But in modern technology, there's other types of eggs that involve etching. So anywhere you don't put wax, it's possible you can actually take away the eggshell. So people have started to use other things. Traditionally, you just use white vinegar, but you can also use bleach to clean the egg off and things like that. So there is a better way probably to do this, but I just do it my way, which drives the old Ukrainian ladies crazy. So if you're really good and you prep a lot of time, you can get these individual pieces broken off on your beeswax and just prep like a bunch of little metal, little piles of wax, and melt them as you go along. But I just tend to melt something off the brick. So my bricks tend to be a little bit ugly. Not being very neat at this. You turn the Kiska to the side in case anybody's wondering what I'm doing, because there's carbon that comes off on the top of the flame. And see, this one's like not behaving today. And if you let that get caught in your Kiska, it will block out the hole. So you can actually get really clogged in there, and you have to get a piece of metal out, and either like a very, very thin wire or a pin or something, and try and clear it out. It's a big pain. So you try not to do that and just put it on the side. So this one has a few boo-boos on it already. I don't know if you can hear, I've got some cats in the background that are about ready to fight. So And then this one's interesting because I normally don't do this. So I've done this design a few times, but the grid lines are as much or as few as you want to put on. So one of the things you can do, if you're trying to have like really nice, clean lines, you figure out what your skill level, I guess, is of free drawing. I tend not to do, I do less free drawing than most probably, but that's partially because I don't like to clean off my eggs in between with vinegar. I do prep the eggs ahead of time because I didn't used to do that. I don't know if the wax, I don't know if they changed the process for prepping eggs at the store or something, but it seems like the eggs these days have a lot more wax on them. And so my dyes, they don't adhere as well. So you can keep going through this and then you build these out. This particular design, like I said, a lot of the designs are shared Pysanky designs. There's a lot of designs that have been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. Because of the symbolism associated with them, there's various ones that are popular. This is one of my favorites. Some of you, I think, even own one of these or variants thereof. Regardless of the design, I've never planned out a design and had it go according to plan. It just doesn't work like that. Eggs come in different sizes, and your how you put them on, how wide things are, everything will affect how your lines are structured. So I tend not to worry about that too much. Just run ahead here a little bit. So this particular one has, looks like 5 colors. There are some traditional colors. A lot of people ask me why all my eggs are black. Black is a very common finishing color. It's actually not as negative as it sounds to have black on your eggs, but the high contrast also helps. Move this up slightly. So there's actually an old story. It's one of my favorite stories. There's lots of legends associated with Pysanky, probably because it's been around so long. But there's one that says, it comes from the Carpathian Mountains, that there's a great snake that is prepared to destroy the world. And this snake has these minions. And at the end of every year, the minions go out and they measure, they weigh how many Pysanky have been created. And if it's if the scales are align in the favor of the snake, then the snake is actually released. His chains are loosened and he's released into the world, and it creates havoc for a year. So if there is no Pysanky created in the year, they say the world will end. I probably didn't do enough Pysanky last year because 2020 is kind of annoying. So can keep going on this. You can see why I've probably staged this a little bit, because this can go on for a while. So we'll jump ahead slightly, especially since this one, I'm going to swap out this Kiska. This one's running a little bit thick for me. So here you have one with the general design, the motif on here. All of this obviously is done in white. I probably should have dipped this one a little bit longer. I don't know if this one made it into the vinegar bath, but if you use a vinegar bath, it wears away parts of the egg, like I said, with the etching. But anything, if you're worried about your lines, all those kind of dissolve in that. A lot of the design lines, the structured lines, actually aren't visible at the end because they're the number of layers of color that you put on there is pretty rare, but that you would be able to see them. But depending on what design you're doing, it can make a big difference. So if you're going to have an egg that you dye all the way back to white at some stage, for example, that becomes more problematic. And this one, like I said, there's never an egg design that survives first contact with the wax. So this one I actually wanted to show you guys some of the yellow dye on, but I can show that on the next egg. I'll just put a couple of these gizmos on. So there are, like I said, a lot of traditional symbols that get reused a lot. I tend to like them, but there's a lot more creative motifs that are going on now. So again, checking, since I was talking too much and not paying enough attention to the wax, the amount of wax on my Kiska. In the first part here, I'm double checking to make sure that I don't have extra buildup on here because it does kind of blurp out in those big blobs. You want to try and stop that from happening. One of the reasons why I prefer these kinds of Kiskas versus the electric ones is because I find them a little bit easier to hold. This is kind of similar to how, let's see if I can do this without burning myself. This is similar to how you might hold a paintbrush in certain, it's not identical, but some people will probably be familiar with this style. So it's a very short one, obviously. It's fitting right in my hand. One of the interesting things about this, I don't know why this is, but the eggs seem to have a prevalence, and maybe it's just because of how clean the lines go on the white egg, but there's a lot of designs that actually have a lot of white structure in them for the underlying design. And then as you go on, obviously, you start to fill up more and more of the egg. And so your ability to add more wax, even if you had a design planned out, it's not always the case that you can get that physically on the egg. A lot of the dyes have vinegar in them. So that also plays a role because if you, the wax by and large keeps the vinegar off of it. But if you keep leaving it in the dye for longer periods of time, it can wear underneath of the wax a little bit, and some of your wax will pop off. Which I don't really think, I mean, as long as it's not too bad, I don't think it detracts from the egg very much, but it can play a role in how visible the design is at the end. The Kiskas come in different sizes. The smaller they are, the easier they are to clog. Here, we'll do this slightly for 1 second. The easier they are to clog, and so I'm actually only using one size right now for speed. So I've got some yellow dye here. This is not the fastest of all the dyeing colors for whatever reason, but I want to show you how quickly this can happen. Interesting fact, if you leave your eggs out too long, they float. That's how you can tell, like, this egg's in pretty good shape because it sank. But as the egg starts to decompose, they start to get more gases stuck in there and they blow up a little bit. So you can see how quickly that, you know, it's not the prettiest yellow yet, but it's not bad. So it's a lot faster than you would think. So that was probably only 5-6 seconds. I go through an exceedingly large amount of paper towels during this process. A lot of people wear gloves, but I drop the eggs when I wear gloves, so I tend not to do that. So you could keep this in there longer, but I'm kind of used to the colors, so I know what the colors will be. So I don't expect that one to be a lot darker, so I'm just going to remove that. So here we have magic of television. Switch this back over. I've prepped a number of eggs for you to speed up the process because this can take a long time. So here we have one that had the design that I was trying to put on everything, not the one I just put on that other white egg. So it has a lot of the same lines you saw on the one that we just looked at. That one, again, all these lines were put on in white. So when you take the wax off, they will show the whiteness of the egg. You notice the dye will take to different sections of the egg in different ways. So that's always exciting. So you don't necessarily have a great understanding of what the dye will look like or what the egg will look like in the end, because there's, you can go through, for whatever reasons, if you go through a number of these, when you get to the end, the dye just doesn't adhere as well. So as I was saying, I've started to actually wash these in a vinegar bath because if I can't get farm fresh eggs, I don't know what they're putting on some of the eggs, but the dye is not working the way it once did. So I have a couple of different companies that I like to buy dye from. One of them is the Ukrainian egg shop, or the Ukrainian gift shop in Minnesota. They kind of popularized it in the United States. They had their great grandmother now probably came over, and I want to say in the 50s, but in the 70s she started making this like an actual thing, and they started selling kits. So the same company that I bought kits from in high school are still the biggest seller of kits, 15, 20 years later. So there you go. I think for a lot of people, when you see a finished egg, it's a little bit hard to see how you get there, but that's something you kind of learn. A lot of, if you're going to say, oh, I want to see a design book, a lot of the design books, interestingly enough, aren't even in color. They're actually in black and white. And so you get very good, kind of like those little puzzles you did when you were in elementary school. Identify the differences between these two pictures. And so the whole process is recognizing what additive lines have been added. Sometimes they'll tell you the color combination, sometimes they won't. Like I said, you kind of get used to some of the dyeing principles behind some of them, but in general, what you're talking about is warm colors go well with warm colors, cool colors go well with cool colors. So if you do greens, purples, blues, again, with deference to the fact that some of those dyes are going to be darker. If you have good quality, not too old, because they tend to lose their potency over time, black dye, then it should cover everything. I also meant to say early on, if you can't hear me for any reason, please let me know. I'm assuming that my audio is pretty good. So black will tend to cover pretty much anything, but again, there seems to be a limitation to how many colors you can get on the egg to hold. So if you start getting above 4 or 5, usually what's happened there is you've painted on some of the colors in very specific locations. Green and orange do not dye well together. So a lot of people actually they'll dye that green, put on the wax relief, then they have a separate set of just pure orange dye that is only to clean off the green, and so you dump that in there. And then they'll have a second unadulterated stash of orange dye that throw the egg in. So the colors have really changed a lot over the years. There's definitely traditional colors that were all originally based on, herbs and roots and normal botanicals. But a lot of these are aniline dyes, so they do have some of that, but I can't guarantee the degree to which they're, organic, we'll say. This is called the meander. This little curly Q. There's like several variations on curly Qs, but it's actually supposed to indicate how your life changes over time, and you get redirected and you kind of find your way down a new path. So general principles apply here. The faster you can put your lines on, the smoother and thinner the wax comes out. The funny thing about doing one of these demos, the nice thing I guess about doing it virtually and not in person is that if you saw me in person, you will notice that I tend to hunch my shoulders and kind of crouch into the egg, which means that this can actually be pretty painful if you do this for long enough. But thankfully, you don't get to see my bad posture now. And the wax. I don't know if somebody had a question. I heard background noise. So it definitely takes a long time, as you can see. Like I said, trying to help you guys out. I'm gonna speed up here a little bit. I've got several eggs, but honestly, the most wax you put down is usually in the first couple of colors. So here you have a yellow egg. In this particular design, because we've got a botanical, we're doing a poppy motif on the back. You have to basically paint on each one of these green sections and put them, because you can put the green down on top of the yellow, but you can't put the green down on top of the you can't put the orange on top of the green. So the orange that comes next can't deal with that. So this is probably not the most exciting part, but you can see this general paintbrush and ink. The problem with this part, one of the reasons why I probably shouldn't have picked this design is because it actually takes a surprisingly long amount of time for the dye to settle on the egg. But you come through and even if you go outside of the lines, I try not to do that, but even if you go outside of the lines, the dye, follow and dye colors will clean it up. But you can see you just kind of paint within the lines. You have a little bit of a well here based on where the green, where the wax is, so you can just paint the green inside of those. After it dries, you have to come in like you would anything else, and then you take your Keysca and you cover wax over those specific sections. Jumping ahead here slightly. So this is the orange, so this has all the green covered up. And so you can see the colors start to, well, you can see how you might be confused about what your egg is going to look as you keep going on, because there's nothing really about this that is, as you start to layer on all this wax, it's really hard to see what the end product's going to look like. So this one is just a couple of steps, although probably many minutes above that egg that we just looked at, because it has all of the green sections done. Just coloring some of this in. Poppies, interestingly enough, apparently do not have any specific significance on the Ukrainian eggs, which I found kind of surprising because everything else does. But I guess flowers in general are more of a youth and beauty thing than a specific symbol of like remembrance, like it would be for us. So this one's got an inordinate number of dots on the side. One of the things, if you do this, that you want to keep in mind is I'm doing kind of badness here. I can get away with it because I'm making little circles here. But when you're doing lines, you want to try not to go over your lines. It has something to do with how the wax adheres to the egg, so that can actually impact the quality of the line underneath. So that's something you try and just make your wax really, really hot, which is what I'm doing over here in case you're wondering, and try and get them as clean as possible before you put them on. As you start to put on more and more layers, it becomes very easy actually to miss design elements. Like I said, I've never really had a design survive past the original plan because it becomes challenging to check your work the more layers you put on. So this color is called Monarch Orange. I've had a lot of challenges with orange dye. This one's a newer one from a different company out of Canada, actually. It actually looks more like the red that I usually use from a different company. I'll have to check my stash. It's fall now, so I think I have a pumpkin in there, but I haven't made the dye yet. Some of these other ones I put curly cues on this inner meander, but I'm not going to do that on this one. It looks pretty busy. So let's do this again because it's kind of fun. So this is a red. It's called Sacred Amaranth. I don't think it's actually made from the plant, but grab a spoon. Egg. Dye. I think that this is really why I got into this, because it's amazing. I mean, especially if you've ever dyed eggs, it's amazing how quickly the colors can change on these. And the colors are so vibrant at the end, depending on what colors you use. So you can start to see this one's already turning kind of a rosy color. I'll leave that one in for another minute. So here's one that has come out of the dye. This was probably, I don't know, 5 minutes. Switch back your view so you can see what I'm doing. So this is a very, very dark, almost purpley, like a mulberry. So if you don't use a green or another color that requires you to paint on before going on to the next step, typically you're talking about dyeing them, they dye very quickly, and then drying them off or letting them air dry before you put on the next layer. Again, that has something to do with the fact that there's a lot of vinegar. There's a couple, typically, except for with oranges, there's usually a couple, at least a couple tablespoons of vinegar in the dyes. And so you kind of want the eggs to settle back down before you start scraping on them with a tool. Trying to recall this one. So periodically at some point, like I said, you got to keep in mind if you're doing your own design anyway, you have to keep in mind the color orders of things. And then right now the egg is very pink, but it's not going to be pink in the end. So anything where you'd like to preserve the pink color, that's what you have to do now. So towards the end of an egg like this one, you're filling in large sections. So here I'm filling in, kind of covering up this curly Q that was done in yellow a while ago. This is where you do want large blobs of wax to come out, because if you have to go over and over this, it becomes really challenging to make sure you got an even layer of wax underneath. Keeping an eye on the time for you. So this would be something that you'd repeat, obviously, on this side. I'm not going to do the full thing right now just because of the timing, and I want to show you some of the finishing work. Again, since whatever your final color is, you keep that in mind because that's going to be the primary color on the egg if you haven't covered most of this up in wax. Not as attractive as it was on just the white or the yellow. So here's one that you can see it has a lot more of the wax layers on it. And it's also gone into the black dye. In this particular egg, the black didn't take as well as I would have liked, but it's not bad. You probably can't even tell some of that. But for me, I can see some of the patching in it. So there's a couple ways to clean up your eggs. Obviously, you have to get all the wax off. This one it's been blown out. You can see there's a hole in the bottom. I learned if you don't blow, you can blow them out at the end, but there's a couple problems with that. One is the yolk will actually take off the dye. So one of the nice things about having something that's covered in wax like this is it actually is fairly protected. Traditionally, people did not use an oven. I'm not going to use an oven today, but something like this, again, modern technology. So my boyfriend made me this one since I lost my other one. So this odd looking torture device allows you to set your eggs in the oven and at a low temperature, and you can just leave them in there and 4 minutes, maybe 170, maybe 200, and all the wax will come off, and you can take it off with a tissue, and it's really straightforward. Historically, we didn't use ovens. So this is kind of an interesting thing. I haven't done this in a little bit. So I'm getting a different candle because the candle I'm using is a little bit low. Hopefully you can see. So I mentioned earlier there's a lot of wax, or there's a lot of carbon fiber that comes off the top of the candle. So what you want to do is try and not get that on your egg. The first time I did this in front of a Ukrainian lady, it must have been like my first class or something, but they definitely came by and started screaming at me. So as long as you don't put I read about this from a very successful Pysanky artist, and as long as you don't put your egg on top of the flame, then you actually can get away with putting it next to it or even in it, because again, the carbon is coming off the top. So you can melt off this wax. Beeswax is really nice, in addition to it like smelling very nicely. I mean, I don't know if there's other waxes you could use. I wouldn't encourage it because this just comes out so smoothly and it has such a good melting point, coupled with the fact that you wouldn't want to use anything that has paraffin just because it puts kind of that weird sheen back on the egg that I took off with the vinegar. So you can see how it's starting to come out. This is probably by far the most exciting part of doing your egg, which, like I said, could take several hours. Because this is the first time you can really start to see some of the designs. As long as you don't put it in the flame, you're fine. If you put it in the flame, you'll stain the egg and the design. And I'm just wiping this off my other hand with a very dirty now tissue. Make sure you don't get the tissues with the lotion on them. That would be bad. So this, this can take another 5 minutes just as part of the process of wiping off some of this wax. So I've definitely, especially as I do more of these eggs, I've gotten really used to using the oven just so I can do 5, 6, 7 at once. It's just the only limitation you have there is the size of your torture board. So on this one, I put in 2 red lines. So I put red around the meander, the yellow meander, and also around the wave motif. It's not the most exciting part, but there's actually even very traditional divisions of your egg. So the divisions have names and stuff. So depending on where your primary aspect of the pattern is going to reside on the egg, you'll divide and put your pencil lines in different positions. I was originally supposed to do this demo, as you heard, in the spring, about a week after Easter. And it was kind of funny, as I was cleaning off one of these eggs yesterday, I realized that the green is actually really dominant in this design. I didn't think it would be, but the green next to the red with these colors, kind of the mulberry, it's very Christmassy. So I have a finished one here. I find the whole removing the wax part really exciting, but I can't guarantee that you do as well. We'll put this guy here for a second. So here's one that that has all the wax taken off of it. This one also actually has 1 coat of polyurethane on it. You can see some of the similarities. I actually kind of like it without the polyurethane, but the design, the eggs are going to take the egg differently. So even if you have the same design on multiple eggs, it never comes out the same twice. One of these I might actually leave without wax on them. That would be kind of interesting. So here's a triptych, and I'll just take some questions. So this is actually one of the more traditional, ancient designs for these kinds of eggs. They're interesting because they always remind me of the Pacific Northwest, but they're not. So one of the reasons why they're called that is they're generally limited. This one actually has, in terms of colors, this one actually has 4 colors on it, but you wouldn't notice until you look at it closely because it only has a couple of touches of orange. Are there any questions? I didn't want to keep you guys too long, but...
Sarah, how do you sink an egg in your dye when it's been blown out before you dye it?
So I try and fill it up with sand usually, but if I'm being lazy, and I always regret it when I do this, as long as the egg is clean on the inside, you can sink it actually with spoons and stuff. So I'll use a weird contraption that I make with spoons and rubber bands actually, just to force it down. The problem isn't really sinking the egg. It's if you don't block the holes, it's getting the dye out of the egg. So then you have to go through the same process that you would otherwise. I mean, it's exactly like blowing out the egg, except for the dye is thinner. So that's kind of a bummer. But a lot of times, if I have one that's already blown out, I will just sink it with spoons. When I do the polyurethane, I actually don't sink it at all. I just roll it on the top of the polyurethane with gloves on. Because I don't really want the polyurethane inside the egg for the same reason. Since I blow these out over a sink usually, so don't want polyurethane in my sink. I don't know if you heard, Bernadette, but I was saying, for a long time I didn't blow my eggs out at all, but I lost a few that were several years old, and they were kind of gross. So,
yeah, when I do my goose eggs, I had to blow all of the goose eggs out when they were fresh, and so I put sand in them also, and then just sealed both ends with wax.
The nice thing about doing that is then the eggs don't go to waste. You can eat them. You wouldn't want to eat anything that comes out of these eggs.
Yes, I ate quiche and chiffon cakes for months.
Commitment. Pysanky commitment right there. So you can see it is definitely a slow process, the whole thing. I mean, this would be a little bit faster in the oven, but laying the colors, dyeing, even with the bright dyes, it takes time. You do get used to the patterns if you do. I don't love doing this because I like it. I like to make it more challenging on myself. So I tend not to do the same pattern over and over again, but if you do it like I did for this demo, you can get very adept at putting some of the lines on in the dye. And
Sarah, how long does it take you from start to finish to do an egg?
I mean, it depends on the design. Some of them are hours, some of them are days, some of them are months. So you can see this one's not all the way clean, but it's closer. So you can see how it's starting to pull out some of the colors. So this one has a lot of white on it. The white and the black together are actually supposed to be really optimistic, not depressing like everybody thinks when I give them black eggs. So it's the black and the white as a primary motif is supposed to be an optimistic perspective. So something like this I can do in about an hour and a half. Something like this would take probably 5 hours. It takes longer because of the green. Again, if I pick a design that doesn't have green on it, then I can dye pretty quickly and I don't have to worry about it as much. So you get used to that too. You figure out which designs can be drawn really, really quickly, like freehand drawing. So if we go back to like this egg, which had a crack in it, unfortunately. So this is something that you can freehand fairly quickly. So that helps. If you have to start putting lines on it, then you have to try to adhere. You have to try and follow your lines. And so when you do that, that takes more time. Are there any other questions? I guess I can show you the rest of these again. So a lot of them do have very similar colors. You know, this one has a lot. This has got a lot of red, brick, and orange on it with some black. This actually looks more black than it is. I think the final color on this one actually was this brick color, but it just takes really dark. Between that and just the camera. This one's got a pink background, magenta. It's pinker than it looks in the video. It's got a lot of yellow on it, but I can't really get the colors to come in right on the camera. You get a little bit of it there. So that one actually has a little bit more variation than it also looks on the camera. This one, this is a good middle of the road egg. This would probably take 3 hours from start to finish. Said you see the lattice pattern, very similar designs with the petals on it. Which I guess are a symbol of hope and beauty. A lot of the designs have a lot of the meaning behind some of the symbols is similar. I don't know if that's a regional difference or not. And then some of them are exactly what you would expect. Like this one's got butterflies on it, so it's all hope and, you know, new growth and things like that. Flowers on the bottom.
I love the two-tone colors, like the two-tone red.
Yeah, I like a lot of these. I mean, it's kind of interesting. So this one, for example, this is a white egg. It almost looks like it's a brown, but yeah, it for whatever reason this one has kind of a weird texture on it. I don't know. I probably should pay more attention to that and pay attention to like whether or not it's because some of it probably has variation in the shell itself. So that might be chicken related, especially when I get the farm fresh eggs, but I'm not necessarily paying attention to that. So that's my connecting points demo with like 15 eggs. This is one in progress. This one's kind of annoying because I actually have to apparently this one has a bleach step in the middle of it for reasons. They're worried about the purple taking effectively, so there's another layer. So this one still needs the red, this orangey color. It still needs that wax layer, and then I actually have to put it in purple. But they want a bleach in between. So I do a combination of like traditional designs that are not my own, and then variations on the traditional designs, and then things that I've seen or things that I've just liked on other eggs before. They all interestingly enough look like cousins. There's not really any egg that I've seen that looked entirely unique. Every once in a while I'll see one, but it's usually an artist's own rendering. So this is like an example of a traditional. This is your instruction sheet. So they're assuming a certain degree of understanding with the dye colors and the process, the divisions, and understand what the layering would look like. Yeah, so it's you can get beginner guides that give a little bit more context than that.
So do you typically have like several eggs going at once, kind of just?
Yes. Because the dye, especially when your dye starts to get old, the colors can take longer to adhere to the egg. So I'll often have many going at once. And then the dye, once it's made, only has so long until you have to theoretically get new dye. So because the potency goes out at over time, I like to try and have a whole bunch of them at once. But that usually means there's one or two eggs that for whatever reason don't get finished. And then they're either really stinky when I blow them out, or I have to eventually abandon them for fear that they destroy the kitchen. So some of my more recent dyes have come from this nice lady, which is probably backwards for you. So
Nope, it's good.
Okay, good. I'll do that here. She's very nice. It comes surprisingly quickly given the fact that it's coming all the way from like Montreal or something. So she's got really interesting dye colors, if anybody is curious. But the Ukrainian gift shop is pretty much the gold standard in the United States for buying materials.